So let's talk about the math a little bit. This is really simple, and I haven't dumbed it down. This is the math. The force required to tow a glider is equal to the aerodynamic drag of the glider, to hold altitude and tow it. Turns out that's equal to the weight of the glider divided by the lift-to-drag ratio of the glider at that flight condition. Pretty straightforward. So really, what does that mean? Well, as an example, I like to throw out what I call boundary conditions, where you say, okay, well, let's try this with some numbers, just to see if it makes any sense. If the glider weighs half of what the rocket does, now that seems like a lot, but if you take a B-52, for example, and you take the payload, which you're not going to carry, bombs, that sort of a thing, if you're just looking for the empty weight of a glider, and you subtract out the weight of the payload, you subtract out the weight of the fuel, because you don't have that, you subtract out the weight of the engines and all the systems that go with that, and now look at the weight of the airplane, and then look at what a B-52 will carry aerodynamically, you have an airplane that will carry about twice its weight. So it's pretty reasonable, and sailplanes typically fly way beyond their empty weight, as much as twice. So it's within the realm of doing. Some of the structural composites folks have told us that you can probably get to 2.5 to 1, maybe even a little bit higher than that. But she's using a conservative number of 2 to 1 with a glider weight of 100,000 pounds, which is a big glider. That's probably about 175 foot, maybe 200 foot wingspan glider, and a booster weight of 200,000 pounds for a total weight of 300. That's the big rocket. With an L over D of 20, which we think you can get to. Again, gliders typically are in the upper 30s, sometimes low 40s. Maybe you have to put a fairing over the base of the rocket to cut the base drag down. Turns out if you do that like we did on shuttle when we were fairing it, you can knock the drag down of the rocket anywhere from 40 to 60%, just depending on the configuration. You wind up with a tow force of 15,000 pounds. Now that seems like a lot. Turns out if you take a transport, like a DC-10, C-17, L-1011, put 4 hours of fuel in it because you're not flying from here to Australia, basically an hour to altitude, an hour on condition to do the launch, an hour back down, and an hour of reserve. 4 hours is plenty of fuel, and you're not carrying anything else, no passengers, no luggage, fairly lightly loaded airplane. You've got easily that much thrust. L-1011, DC-10, you're up in the 30,000 pound range at altitude pretty easily. So what does that really mean? Now, one of the advantages of this concept is that it is scalable, because the math is linear. There's no to the second or to the third power type terms. It is dead linear math. You do get into some practicality issues, like you get a wingspan that's maybe greater than the runway will handle. You get into issues with a really big glider where the wingspan is such that if it's a single wing, the spar design becomes onerous. You get to an airplane where you could probably set up a living room set inside of the spar. Well, that's not real efficient, so you wind up going to twin or tandem wings and things like that. But basically, if you look at the math and run out the booster weight to maybe out where straddle launch is, glider weight roughly, again, 2 to 1 ratio at a 20 to L over D of 20 to 1, you wind up with a mated pair weight of 750,000 pounds, and you wind up with thrust of about 37,500 pounds. That's within the realm of a lot of airplanes. It's not that significant. And yet, the straddle launch, they're building the world's biggest airplane to carry that weight. So the theory would suggest, one of the senior managers at Dryden had on his marker board, and I don't know where he got it before he retired, but it said, make sure I get this right. In theory and practice are the same. In practice, however, they are not. I'm always reminded of that, because anybody who doesn't understand that they're going to prove that in their career somewhere. And so we always kind of go back. One of the things at Dryden, the center slogan is to separate the real from the imagined. We're going to try to get this out of the imaginary plane into reality as quickly as we can and find out if this is actually real or not. So in looking at this, I'd been told by several people you want to go as high as you can, as fast as you can. Somebody asked yesterday, how high would you launch this at? And the answer, in like most things in life, is it depends. But it's on the order of 38, 35, 38, 40,000 feet. There's some trades, and one of which is, as you go bigger, all the transports are swept wing. So you're not going to tow anything with a straight wing because, a DC-10 is not going to fly around at 0.5 Mach at 40,000 feet. You're falling out of the sky at that point, probably departed the airplane. So you probably need a swept wing design on the glider to carry the bigger rocket behind the bigger transport and so on and so forth. But if you look at it, this is a plot of altitude versus airspeed. If you've got a design, you could look at launching at a faster airspeed. To do that, you probably need to sweep the wings, which means that the L over D is a little bit lower because you lose some efficiency when you sweep wings on airplanes. But you're launching at a higher airspeed, which is higher energy, okay? Or you could look at going to a higher altitude, which would require, but not necessarily going any faster, so you could go with the same unswept wing and a little bit slower launch platform, but you're going to have to carry less weight to get to the higher altitude. Somewhere in that trade is the sweet spot on what is the most optimal in terms of pounds to orbit or minimal dollars per pound to orbit. And there's a lot of trades that need to be done on that, and it's going to vary depending on the size of the rocket that you're trying to carry. So there's no one set answer on it, and there's a lot of studies that still need to be done. Let's talk a little bit about the glider characteristics. The glider would be a true glider. For about every 4 people that I talk with this about, the first 3 go, oh, why didn't we think of that before? And it just seems obvious to them. I find that tends to be more the airplane people, which is probably what most of you folks are. And about the 1 out of 4 person says, well, why don't you just put engines on it? And it's like, well, that's what other people are doing. In fact, that's what I'm trying to get away from because you lose all those advantages. So in this scenario, it is a true glider, no propulsion, no fuel systems, aircraft systems powered by onboard batteries, basically an electric airplane. Remotely flown or optionally piloted, pilot in the loop, stick and rudder with autopilot assist. The simple reality is if you have an airplane like this that is remotely piloted, you've got to be able to gracefully manage loss of the command link. That's the link from the ground to the airplane where you're telling it what to do. You've got to be able to gracefully manage that anywhere from brake release at takeoff to wheel stop at landing. You can't have the vehicle go out and circle in an area until it runs out of energy and crashes because of the value of the payloads and the risk to the public. So you've got to be able to handle that. We'd like to have it be designed for easy disassembly and transport. Electric flight control system, no hydraulics. Flyable storage means you put jacks up under it and get the tires off of the pavement so there's no flat spots on it, but you don't have to go run engines every 60 or 90 days. It's very easy and efficient to store. Glider flight termination system, because you do have to weigh, you got a 300,000, 400,000 pound system. You can't rely on the system working perfect. You do need to have a system that stops the runaway train and keep it from crashing into the school bus full of nuns, as I described. You don't want to have a bad day and have it come down in a playground or a schoolyard somewhere. But you could use that flight termination system to double as the command control system for releasing the booster. Talked about tandem fuselage. It's really twin fuselage with crank center wing section for maximum ground clearance. And you may wind up going to tandem wings when you get to the larger boosters. Again, if you have a rocket, you're going to have to attach it in multiple parts along its length. You can't just carry it in one spot. The bending loads become way, way too high on it to do that. And going to tandem wing would then alleviate that wing spar structural inefficiency that I was talking about. You do lose some L over D. On the other hand, if you point design for it, you can maybe make up some of that. Tow plane characteristics are a lot easier. There's a lot more choices on the table. Whereas the glider would be a purpose-built airplane designed to do exactly this. Here, a large multi-engine transport configuration is likely, 747, 777, 757, C-17. You need significant excess thrust available at altitude, meaning above 35,000 feet. And by significant, you need more than 1,000 pounds. You need enough to drag a fairly large glider. That means big transport. It'd be nice if you had an aft cargo door to make it easier to attach the structural attachment of the tow line. Turns out most of the airplanes, the aft end of the pressure bulkhead on the transports is really, really, really stout. Wouldn't be that hard to hook up the tow line system to that. It's not that difficult of a mod. The other thing, it'd be nice, highly desirable, significant cruise range, or better yet, in-flight refueling capability, highly desirable. The reason why, and this will come up in a slide here in a few moments, is if you can launch at the equator versus like Florida where you're, I can't remember how many degrees, what is it, about 12 degrees north, something like that, 8 degrees north, that extra radius of the Earth is a rotating mass, and it doesn't matter if you're air launching or ground launch, you still pick up the 12% boost because the air mass rotates with the Earth. The French launch Ariane out of French Guiana, which is, I think, 1.5 degrees or so off of the equator because they pick up that performance boost, and it's free. Currently, our launches out of the Cape, you don't get the advantage of that. So if you can do in-flight refueling or you have significant range, you could take off from the Cape, fly down to the equator, and then do your launch from that geographic location and pick up that 12%. It costs you nothing to do it other than what it costs to ferry down to the area. Boeing has an entity called Sea Launch that they do where they have a modified oil platform, and they do vertical launches from that out in the middle of the ocean. And almost all their launches are launched down near the equator for that reason.